He had never taken that route before. The snow was falling hard that morning, swirling like ash across Union Station. Aiden Mercer had just left a board meeting early, driven more by instinct than any real reason. His car was parked on the far end of the street, but something told him to walk through the terminal. It wasn't the shortest way home. It wasn't the warmest, but it led him to her. She was sitting under the stairwell, knees drawn to her chest, a scarf wrapped tightly around her head. People passed without looking. Some glanced, most didn't. Aiden almost didn't stop. Almost. But then he saw her face. There was something in the way she looked up at him. No panic, no plea, just recognition. As if she'd seen him before, as if she knew who he was. Aiden froze, his breath hitched, not from the cold, but from something deeper. A pull, an ache that didn't have language. Her eyes were tired, the kind of tired you don't sleep off, and her hands trembled as she held a paper coffee cup with nothing in it but a dime. Aiden reached into his coat. She didn't ask. He offered cash. She didn't take it. Instead, she said one word, his name. Aiden. His body tensed. He didn't speak. He couldn't. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the terminal. He studied her again. Her lips were cracked, her skin weathered, but her voice low, uncertain, and full of something ancient was unmistakable. Aiden knelt beside her. His voice, when it came, cracked in the middle. "Have we met?" She looked down and then whispered, "No, I just guessed." But the damage was done. Something had opened in him. He asked her name. She answered Melinda. The name struck him like thunder. Aiden had seen that name once, buried in a sealed envelope from his adoption file. Melinda, mother unknown. No contact since birth. That couldn't be her. It shouldn't be. But his feet didn't move, and neither did his heart. He called a ride and helped her up. She resisted, weakly, but followed. She smelled of cold pavement and old smoke. She didn't say much on the way back. He didn't either, but his mind was racing. Back at his condo, still under renovation, he guided her inside. No cameras, no staff, no Oliver. She curled up on the old couch and fell asleep within minutes. Aiden stood into the kitchen, hands trembling as he searched online how to collect a DNA sample discreetly. A brush, a few strands of hair from the scarf, careful not to wake her. He sealed it in a small bag, labeled it with shaking hands, and packed it to send in. It was nothing. A coincidence, a common name, a soft voice on a cold day. That's what he told himself. But deep down, something was breaking loose. A chamber he'd boarded up years ago now cracking open. And the woman sleeping in his living room might be the key to everything he thought he'd buried. To follow the rest of Aiden's story, his past, his truth, and the possible choice ahead, subscribe to Heart Story. New parts every week. True healing begins with truth. For the first time in years, Aiden didn't go into the office. He sat at the edge of the kitchen counter, watching the woman sleep on the sofa in the room next door. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. Her coat hadn't come off. She'd curled herself into a ball like she didn't trust the floor beneath her feet. The envelope with the hair sample had already been sent. Overnight express. He told himself it was routine, eliminating a wild thought. But the moment he sealed that envelope, something inside him shifted. Something fragile had begun to stir. By late afternoon, she was awake. She didn't ask where she was, didn't demand to leave. She moved slowly, scanning every corner of the apartment like someone afraid to belong anywhere. Aiden offered her tea. She nodded. Her hands were even more weathered than he remembered, fingers swollen from cold, joints stiff. The scarf stayed on. When she told him her name again, he said nothing. He didn't reveal what he suspected. Not yet. He needed confirmation first. Until then, she was simply Melinda, a stranger with the same name as a ghost. That night, he texted Oliver. He didn't mention her, just said he needed space, renovations, work stress, something vague enough to keep him from coming over. But Oliver came anyway. He arrived unannounced the next morning. The door opened to the sight of an elderly woman wrapped in blankets, sitting on the balcony with a cup of tea. Oliver stared. "Who is that?" he asked sharply. Aiden didn't flinch. "Her name is Melinda. She homeless." "Yes, and she's living here. For now." Oliver's silence wasn't surprise. It was anger dressed in silence. His jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed not at Melinda, but at Aiden. "You're not serious," he said finally. "I think she might be my mother." The words fell heavy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask for understanding. He simply stated what he believed. Oliver didn't respond right away. He paced the room. His polished shoes echoed against unfinished floors. When he finally stopped, he said something cold. "You think a woman on the street is your mother, and your first instinct is to bring her home." Aiden didn't answer. Oliver left without another word. By evening, Melinda spoke more. Just fragments, mentions of a bus stop in Cincinnati, a shelter in Des Moines, the year she almost froze in Denver, but never anything about family, never anything about children. It was as if she was trying to erase that part of her life. Aiden pressed gently. Not questions, just attention. He listened. He noticed how she folded napkins with quiet precision, how she kept apologizing for using water, how she never asked for more than was offered. It was subtle, but in the way she moved, the way she avoided mirrors, the way she said his name once, only once, it felt like a map of grief. Still, nothing was certain. Aiden walked to the table where she left her scarf. Long, faded wool, strands of hair caught in the fibers. He had already collected some. Still, he stared at it like it might answer everything. The next morning, the testing service confirmed the envelope had arrived. Results were expected in a few days. And Aiden, he couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus. Every time he passed the living room, he looked for signs, a familiar gesture, a habit, a sound. But Melinda said nothing about the past. No stories about babies or hospitals, no names. It was like she had swallowed her entire history, too afraid to ever speak it aloud. She sat on the couch most days, silent, as if waiting for something she wasn't sure would ever come. And Aiden watched her. Watched and waited, too. Not for her to say it, but for the proof to arrive, proof that would either tear open an old wound or finally give it a name. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning. It was Plano logo, no branding, just a barcode and his name printed in clean, cold ink. Aiden didn't open it right away. He held it like it was something sacred or dangerous, like it might burn his hands if he moved too fast. Melinda was asleep in the guest room. She'd stopped asking questions. She never asked why he let her stay or when she should go. Her presence had become quiet background noise, like the ticking of a clock you only notice when it stops. Aiden sat alone on the edge of the bed, envelope balanced in one hand, unopened. The last time he'd seen his own adoption documents, he was 17. A single name had stood out then, Melinda. No surname, no date of birth, no forwarding address. The file had been thin. Just a note, birth mother waived further contact. He'd never known why. Until now. He peeled open the envelope with steady fingers. Inside, a single sheet. At the bottom, in bold letters, probability of maternity, 99.9. His hand covered his mouth. The weight of it wasn't in the numbers, it was in everything those numbers made real. The years of not knowing, the ache of being chosen but never found. The quiet wondering if someone out there still remembered the sound of his newborn cry. And now the answer was sleeping down the hallway. Later that evening, he found Melinda in the living room, sitting by the window. She didn't look at him when he entered. She was watching the snowfall, hands resting still in her lap. He sat across from her. Then, carefully, he told her what he'd learned. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp or cry. She simply nodded, and then said nothing for a long time. The silence didn't feel cold. It felt like she was building up the strength to speak from a place she had buried for decades. Finally, she exhaled, and her voice came out like cracked glass. She was 19, alone in a state-run hospital. She'd gone into labor in a waiting room because she couldn't afford a cab. No family, no partner, just nurses and concrete walls. After giving birth, a woman came to her bedside, well-dressed, polite, persuasive. She claimed to work with a private organization that helped find good homes for children of unfit mothers. That's what she called Melinda. Unfit. Melinda had refused at first, but no one else came. There was no one to call. She hadn't even chosen a name yet. After 3 days of silence, a clipboard appeared beside her mouth with a form on it. The woman said, "This is your last chance to give him a future." So she signed and never saw him again. Years later, she learned that the organization had ties to private adoption agencies, many with donors from wealthy families. Some names she remembered. One in particular stood out, the Langston Family Foundation. Aiden felt the air shift. Oliver's last name wasn't just a coincidence. His family had funded the very system that took Melinda's son away, and now that son was engaged to marry into that legacy. Aiden sat still. He asked Melinda why she never tried to find him. She looked down. Because no one calls a woman like her back. Because once you sign a piece of paper and walk out of a hospital with empty arms, the world doesn't offer second chances. Aiden felt something sharp and silent rise in his chest. Not anger, not yet, but a clarity that pierced deeper than rage. He stood up, walked to the bedroom, and picked up his phone. Oliver answered on the second ring. Aiden told him everything. The name, the match, the story, the foundation. The silence on the line was thick. Then came Oliver's voice, low, controlled, laced with panic. "If this gets out," he said, "you won't just ruin our wedding and you'll destroy my family's name." Aiden said nothing. Oliver continued, voice tighter now. "You can't go public with this. My father was on the board. If this surfaces, he'll be accused of supporting child trafficking. Do you understand?" But Aiden wasn't thinking about boardrooms or headlines. He was thinking of a young woman signing a form with no ink left in her heart, and a boy who never knew her name, and the man he thought he'd marry, now begging him to bury the truth. The invitation had never felt heavier. It had been printed on thick cardstock, embossed in gold, and delivered in a velvet box, an engagement announcement for Aiden Mercer and Oliver Langston, set to be the wedding of the season. But now the glitter felt absurd. The date meant nothing, and the box was gathering dust at the edge of a countertop no one cleaned anymore. Aiden didn't go to work. He didn't return Oliver's calls. The apartment was quiet, save for the sound of Melinda's footsteps, slow, uncertain as she moved through a space still not hers. She never asked if she could stay. She never assumed she belonged. But Aiden didn't ask her to leave either. On Sunday morning, Oliver returned. He didn't come alone. Behind him stood his parents, William and Clarissa Langston, the man who built towers across Chicago, the woman who chaired boards and gave speeches on philanthropy, both impeccably dressed, their presence cold as winter steel. Melinda was seated in the living room, her hands folded politely, her hair combed back, and the same coat still wrapped around her shoulders. Clarissa didn't sit. William did. He leaned back slowly, surveyed the room, and then turned his gaze to Melinda like she was a stain that needed scrubbing out of expensive carpet. "I understand you believe there's some connection here," he began, voice rich with practiced diplomacy. "But let's not mistake sentiment for truth." Aiden stood nearby, silent. Melinda said nothing. Then William continued, this time with edge. "This woman, whatever her past, has no place in this conversation. She is not family. She is not legacy. She is a disruption. And finally, if this circus continues, I will have no choice but to publicly revoke my support for your name. Aiden." That was the line, not drawn, imposed. Aiden didn't reply. He simply walked out of the room. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, staring at the closed bedroom door, listening to the faint rustle of Melinda breathing on the other side of the wall. Her presence wasn't loud. It was steady, real. Meanwhile, Oliver waited in the kitchen. His voice had softened. His words turned to please. We can find her a place, somewhere safe. We can support her, quietly. But if you go public, we both lose everything. Everything. What was everything? A last name that came with conditions, a love that couldn't withstand a mother's story, a wedding funded by people who silenced women like Melinda. At sunrise, Aiden opened a drawer and pulled out the ring. The diamond didn't sparkle in the dim light. It just sat there, cold, pretty, meaningless. He left it on the table next to a folded letter. He didn't knock on Oliver's door. He didn't call for a car. He packed 2 bags, one for himself, one for Melinda. He helped her into the coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck. And they stepped outside into the bitter morning air. Oliver wouldn't see him again. Not that day, not ever. The letter was short. It read, I once believed love meant staying silent to protect what we built. But now I know if a man can't respect the woman who brought me into this world, he cannot walk beside me through the rest of it. This isn't revenge. It's remembrance of a name that was taken, of a truth that was buried, and of a son who chooses to be whole. Aiden signed it with nothing but his first name because it was the only part of his identity that hadn't been built on someone else's terms. That morning, headlines were already beginning to shift, but he didn't read them. He was busy carrying his mother's suitcase down a quiet street toward a life where no one would ever ask her to stay silent again. The apartment was smaller, older, and nothing like the skyline suite Aiden once shared, but it was quiet. It was theirs. It overlooked Lake Michigan, where the wind carried stories across the water and time felt less cruel. Melinda took the smaller bedroom. She didn't ask for it, just quietly claimed the space with the caution of someone who still wasn't sure she had the right to stay. At first, she barely spoke. The walls, the windows, the warmth, none of it seemed real to her. But Aiden never rushed her. He learned her rhythm, the way she took her coffee, the songs she hummed softly in the early hours, the way she folded towels with a precision no one taught her. He hired a private physician to visit weekly, a therapist, too, though Melinda needed time before opening up. Her body had survived decades of hardship, but her voice, her truth had only just begun to resurface. And yet, as the days passed, something changed. Aiden noticed it in small moments. The way she smiled when the nurse greeted her by name, the way she began leaving her bedroom door open, the way she started calling him dear under her breath, like the word had been waiting for a place to land. Then came the article. It began with a photo of Aiden standing beside an older woman in a gray coat, her eyes tired but proud. The headline read, Tech entrepreneur walks away from fortune to reunite with the mother who was stolen. The piece didn't accuse. It didn't sensationalize. It told the truth. How Melinda was pressured into signing adoption papers she didn't understand. How her son rose to build an empire. And how he chose not to hide her when the world expected him to. The public response was unexpected. Letters came in, emails, messages from others who'd been adopted, or had given up children, or were still searching. People began to call her by name, Melinda. Not that homeless woman, not the disruption, but the mother who had been silenced. And that name, spoken with kindness, began to undo years of erasure. She no longer looked down when walking into clinics, no longer hesitated when asked for ID. She even bought a plant for the kitchen, a small gesture of permanence. Aiden was asked to speak at a community event not long after the article. He said yes, on the condition that Melinda be there. She wore a new coat, her hair combed back, a scarf she chose herself. She sat in the front row. When Aiden stood at the podium, he didn't mention companies or contracts. He told one story, the only one that mattered. He spoke of a woman who had no choice, who gave up her son with a broken heart and spent 3 decades believing she'd never say his name again. Then, as the audience held its breath, Aiden turned toward her and said, with no microphone needed, She doesn't owe me an apology. Not for surviving, not for being poor, not for doing what she thought was right. The only thing she's ever said sorry for was not being able to say my name. He paused, then added, but she can now. And I'm here because she exists, not in shame, in strength. Melinda stood. The audience rose with her, not for pity, but in recognition. That night, she cried for the first time, not out of sorrow, but because someone finally saw her as a mother again. Not a mistake, not a signature, a mother. And in the quiet of their apartment, Aiden whispered, "You're not what they said you were. You're why I'm still here." If someone gave you back your name, your truth, would you take it, even if the world looked away? Subscribe to Heart Story for more true-to-life stories of healing, truth, and the quiet power of being seen.